The 7th of September 2013, the start of the debacle and train wreck that is the multi-technology mix NBN. A technical, financial and economic failure. And to quote Chris Duckett in September 2020, what a decade of useless and wasteful argument that was. So let's just start off with some of the astonishing revelations in the NBN's November 2022 Special Access Undertaking, or SAU document, of the catastrophic actual operating and maintenance cost comparisons of the LNP's multi-technology mix, NBN, in particular fibre to the node and HFC, versus fibre to the premise, and the disastrous unreliability of MTM copper wire and HFC. And it's just two shocking examples. The NBN states that fibre to the node is 22 times more costly than fibre to the premise in terms of operating costs, and fibre to the node fault volumes nearly 4 times higher than average in comparison to fibre to the premise. I mean, it's a truly eye-watering document and a truly shocking real-world indictment of the LNP's multi-technology mix rollout model and policy, and it's even much worse than I expected. And I seriously recommend, if you're interested in looking at the debacle of what the MTM NBN is, go read that document. It's truly eye-watering. So I'll start off with the disastrous financial and economic consequences of the failed multi-technology mix method and policy, including vastly lower revenues and higher operating costs than LNP forecasts, and up to $53 billion a year in lost GDP, and the likely true costs of the original fibre to the premise NBN based on actual real-world NBN data and evidence. So let's just look at last financial year, which, the NBN's sort of praising it's made, $5.3 billion in revenue, which, sounds like a lot. The only trouble with that is they've actually lost $1.12 billion for financial year 23. So, straight out of their annual report, which has only just come out the last couple of days before I've started doing this video presentation. So, it's 1.119 or, 1.2. Loss attributable to the shareholder. Mate, it's an absolute debacle. And look at the free cash flow. The free cash flow's got even worse. It's now 1.4 billion minus 1.4 billion. It's got worse from last financial year. And it's an absolute shocker. It's just a joke. How are they funding that? What, through more debt? I mean, let's go back and look at some of the corporate plans. We'll go back and look at the 21 corporate plan. This is the one that Paul Fletcher released on the same day of his now infamous copper backflip to fibre to the premise. The NBN was supposed to make $5.8 billion in financial year 23. So there's at least $500 million lost revenue for the last financial year. And that's directly as a consequence of the multi-technology mix, because fibre to the node in particular has a lower take-up rate than fibre to the premise, both brownfield and greenfield fibre to the premise. Now there's lost customers to 5G broadband and even the Starlink. So just 1 year from liberal forecasts only a few years ago, $500 million. That's $500 million. So, it begs the question, what would have the original fibre to the premise NBN cost to build in peak funding? Well, the reality is, and all the data and evidence now backs up this conclusion, that it would have had a lower peak funding. So let's look at the evidence for that. To start off with, and this was just when I first read this in Hansard, I almost fell off my chair, because effectively, when you think about it, the NBN's actually admitted they could have rolled out 30,000 a week fibre to the premise connections and done it for a capex cost of $3,900, and that includes the $700 Telstra lease cost. And these figures are sniffing it because I can't remember if it was the strategic review or the cost-benefit analysis, one or the other, said it would be impossible to roll out 30,000 a week. Yet here's Bill Murray saying, oh yeah, well, I could have done that. So let's actually look at what's in the Hansard record, and this is a joint standing committee, I think. So from the Hansard record, Bill Murray saying, could we be rolling out 30,000 a week? Well, basically saying yes. And he says we would have been better, not could have been better, would have been better. And then the ALP Senator Urquhart says, Mr. Murray, can I just clarify? Did you say you could hit 30,000 a week with FTTP? Then Murray says, it's not beyond unthinkable. So he's not saying no. And he's basing that 30,000 a week saying, well, we've seen what we've done with fibre to the curb and all the improvements with that. And then Bill Murray even doubles down on that 30,000 a week by then stating, if someone said that's a challenge they'd throw down in front of me, I'd take the challenge. I mean, that's just astonishing omission. And then what about the capex? Well, they admitted twice in 2017, 2018, they could do it for $3,900. That's on the Hansard record. So Senator O'Neill asked, Mr. Murray, you said on the 27th of November you could deploy fibre to the premise for $3,900 per premise. Is that correct? Then Murray says, yes, that would roughly be it. So the underlying construction cost would be $3,200. So, you know, like, again, that's just astonishing. Astonishing admissions. And more real-world data and evidence is, you know, back in 2015, when the NBN was actually they were still rolling out the committed contracts that Labor had signed. They were doing up to 24,000 connections a week. And the NBN confirmed that. Again, it's in the Hansard record. And they actually did it with a lot less staff than they had just a few years later, because, you know, Turnbull had to go hire a whole bunch of new workers because they're multi-technology mixed debacle. So, you know, so I think the only conclusion you can come to is, like, with those figures, with that real-world data and evidence, there's no way it was going to take another 6 or 8 years to roll out. You know, and the other bit of evidence is from the NBN's own strategic review from 2013, figures which they actually hid. So secret figures show full fibre, NBN may have cost 10 billion less than claimed. So in other words, from scenario 2, 64 billion, down to 54 billion. Amazing stuff. So what would have the original full fibre NBN actually cost to 91.5% of Australian premises based on the real data and evidence from the NBN itself? Well, I've done the analysis and I've got some, I wouldn't say expertise, but some knowledge, finance knowledge, and also some ICT experience, like 2 decades worth, which I'll go into a little bit detail later on. But, you know, if you do the cash flow analysis, I've come up with a figure of 56 billion, and that includes the Telstra lease costs. So that mirrors the 54 billion from the hidden figures from the LNP's own strategic review. As one of the LNP's own senators said back in 2005, we need to ensure that a solid platform is in place to deliver the technology that will take us into the future. The copper age was 5,300 years ago, and that is where copper belongs. We need to embrace optic fibre, wireless and satellite, so we have the right mix of infrastructure that take us into the future. What a pity they didn't do it. I mean, this is classic, what just shows you how silly the arguments have been over the years about how much the original full fibre NBN would have cost. I mean, these are figures that have been quoted by the LNP over the years and backed up by some in the media and some of their consultants, which, you know, I won't say too much because I don't want to get myself sued. But, you know, look at the figures that they've quoted: 500 billion, 100 billion, 94 billion, 84 billion, which wasn't even a costing of Labor's original full fibre NBN, and the same with the 74 billion. It was the so-called counterfactual in the 2016 corporate plan. It wasn't costing Labor's plan at all. It was costing after the tens of billions had been wasted on the MTM, and then stop that and go back to fibre. And then in a strategic review, 73 billion and 64 billion. I mean, how many different goes did they want at it? And the same with when it would have been completed by. I mean, I found this in Hansard back from 2013. Turnbull saying, oh, it's going to take 100 years to complete. 13. It's just ridiculous. And then 2033, 2028 and 2026, which again were the so-called counterfactuals, which again wasn't a costing of Labor's original plan. And then 2024, 2023. So these widely varying claims on cost and timeframes by the LNP are now simply debunked and discredited beyond any dispute based on the now real-world data and evidence. Most of that data and evidence is from the NBN itself, and the leaked hidden data and evidence from the LNP's own strategic review as revealed in the Sydney Morning Herald and Guardian newspapers back in 2021. I think it's probably summed up better by Professor Mark Gregory, stated in a submission to a joint parliamentary committee back in 2018, the government statements that FTTP would cost 30 billion more and take 6 to 8 years longer are nonsense, blatantly false and deliberately misleading the Australian public. This was one of the reasons why there was growing calls for a Royal Commission into this debacle, and it is a debacle. And to quote Mark Gregory again, another interesting quote, he states, whatever the outcome of the SAU is, consumers should expect prices to go up because of all the problems related to what the NBN has got today. They've got 6 technologies instead of 3. There are a lot of bad decisions made by the former government. And you know, it does mean there's a lot of work to be done before NBN Co will be what everyone hoped it would be, which was a low-cost wholesale broadband provider. So what's the cost to the Australian economy of the LNP's multi-technology mix NBN? Well, there's some evidence to suggest, this is based on a 2020 Vodafone report, that indicates the multi-technology mix rollout method and policy is now costing the Australian economy up to $53 billion a year in lost GDP versus the original full fibre FTTP NBN. As I said, that's based on a 2020 Vodafone study. So quoting the CEO of Vodafone Australia, where he says, full fibre is key to Australia's telecommunications future, citing a study commissioned by Vodafone's Group Berlin-based think tank, increasing the number of fibre connections in the country by 1% per year is associated with an increase in GDP of between 0.02% and 0.04% per year. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but the Australian economy is a $2.2 trillion a year economy. That's the GDP. So it's small numbers multiplied by a very big number, and that's what you roughly get, $53 billion a year. And that Vodafone Stone report, there are other industry reports linking GDP growth and FTTP from the UK, for example from BT Openreach. And based on the Vodafone report and the BT Openreach report, you can work out the disastrous LNP multi-technology mix NBN will have cost the Australian economy up to $500 billion in lost GDP between 2014 and 2035 versus the original full fibre NBN. That assumes that the NBN fixed line is fully upgraded to full fibre in that sort of 2033 to 2035 timeframe. Now, that is a truly shocking and scandalous utter destruction of economic growth, and it's another catastrophic consequence of the LNP's multi-technology mix, rollout, model and policy. And Paul Buddy, who's a well-respected ICT expert here in Australia, quoting him, rather than putting the emphasis on the national benefits, the coalition government will focus on maximising its investment in the NBN. Rarely during the 10 years in office was there a mention of the social and economic benefits. And I think this is part of the problem with the NBN. People just look at revenue and operating costs, which are an issue. But what we should really be looking at are the economic consequences of the copper NBN, as I like to call it, versus the full fibre NBN. It's just stupid. We should be looking at the economic benefits. That's where the real money comes from. So, But anyway, the NBN itself was warned not to go down that path of the MTM, and again, quoting Paul Buddy, they did make those decisions with their eyes wide open to use an MTM a decade ago, and senior engineers and others warned them against taking this convoluted and inferior approach, and now we're starting to see the consequences of it. And another quote from Paul Buddy there saying, it's the MTM's resulted in second-class infrastructure, and it's now the reason for so much pain for both the RSPs and NBN Co, which is true. I mean, everything that's going on with the SAU and pricing and operating costs and revenue can all be linked back to the use of the MTM. That's where the problem is. So, as Paul Buddy's saying, for the NBN to recoup the money, it now has to, additional funding to upgrade the second-rate infrastructure to full fibre. It's going to have high costs, and the only way it's going to recoup those, to some degree, is through higher wholesale pricing. And ultimately, it's the consumer who's going to pay for it. And Telstra is now suggesting that the entire $44 billion cost of building the network, the MTM, should be written off. Well, Telstra probably would say that because it's wanting to buy it. But, I think that's could be inevitable. In fact, it might even be inevitable the debt has to be written off, because that's costing the NBN a fair bit of money each year. So, okay, but is there any good news? Well, there is. So this is now point 2. NBN CEO Stephen Rue confirms the Senate estimates and in the 2024 NBN corporate plan that the disastrous multi-technology mix, copper wire NBN, will be replaced with a full fibre NBN. So what did he say? He says, our copper network will be replaced by fibre, and he's sure about it. So, so that's a quote there from Senate estimates. But, it will take time, but it's the only option. I mean, we can't just continue running on garbage copper. It has to go. So, and the other bit of good news, which was actually after that Senate estimates hearing, was the SAU back from November last year, which basically the NBN's saying basically by June 2029 the bulk of the fibre to net footprint will be fibre. There may be some small amount left, and they'll progressively, force migration to full fibre. So, the reality is by the end of the decade, most of the fibre to no network should be gone. That's what the NBN's saying. So one can only hope that actually happens. I think they actually need to accelerate that, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail shortly. But, I mean, what a complete farce. What a shocking indictment of the MTM debacle. And the NBN's actually admitted in Senate estimates it started planning to actually upgrade, not so much upgrade, but to provide fibre on demand in the fibre to node footprint, even before the fibre to node footprint rollout was even completed. I mean, seriously, they were already starting to plan an upgrade even before they finished rolling the copper garbage out. So, yeah. But anyway, again, in the latest 2024 corporate plan, the NBN states its long-term goal of deploying fibre to the premise across 100% of the fixed line footprint, and that includes HFC as well, because they do say that as well in the corporate plan, that the intention is to upgrade, overbuild the HFC footprint to fibre to the premise. So, finally, mega backclip, the fair income fibre broadband. And that'll help in some respects to fix up the disastrous financial and technical and economic impacts. And it can't come fast enough. In fact, the Parliament needs to ensure that happens as rapidly as possible. So, what I'm saying is the fibre to node footprint. That should be accelerated. That should be completely overbuilt by the end of calendar year 2028. And then for fibre to the curb should be end of calendar year 2030, and then no later than end of calendar year 2033 for fibre to the basement and HFC. It just needs to go. And it should be noted, the LNP were proposing to use fibre to the node until 2040. I mean, seriously. They got no idea. So anyway, so the good news in the annual report, it says 4.36 million premises could access fibre to the premise as of the end of 30 June 2033. So yeah, so that's good. I mean, we've just got to get the fibre out. And it should also be noticed the big players in the telco industry have been crying out for the disastrous MTM to be overbuilt, upgraded rapidly to full fibre for quite some years. In fact, again, the CEO of Vodafone Australia saying full fibre is key to Australia's telecommunications future. And then he also says that a rapid upgrade would bring it to much closer to Labor's original fibre vision, which is true. And then the chairman of Telstra back in 2020 saying, I think the upgrading of the NBN is a fantastic thing for the country. And the faster we move to fibre to the premise, the better for everyone. And a single-purpose network will always outperform a multi-technology mix. It will be easier to maintain than the mix that we have at the moment, which is absolutely true. So this is now a quote from the CEO of Launtel, which, and this is true, I mean, they're rolling out more fibre, but the really high-speed plans, especially the high-speed uploads, the pricing's too high. They need to get the pricing of that down, but anyway. So, but, he's kind of saying the same thing, we need to get, concrete commitments to fibre to the prem across the entire network. That's a fixed line network, of course. And, and that seems to be the way to improve the service levels, which is true. So, the multi-technology mix, the LNP's multi-technology mix, its model and its policy is simply not fit for purpose. It never was. And the big telcos and the RSPs want the MTM overbuilt, upgraded rapidly to fibre to the premise. Okay, let's look at a little bit of past history on the MTM. So, the LNP claimed their train wreck MTM NBN would be finished by 7th of September 2016. And for 29.5 billion. And Malcolm Turnbull was the person to make that happen. Well, geez, yeah, how did that work out? Well, in reality, after almost 3 years, so by the 30th of June 2016, this is all in the NBN's corporate plans, the LNP had actually delivered 100,000 copper connections, and that was all fibre to the node or fibre to the basement, so no HFC, no fibre to the curb, and their budget already ballooned out from their promised 29.5. So clearly, based on their own benchmarks and KPIs, it was already a failed project. Simple as that. Okay, point 4, the MTM first, then fibre on demand and the real world financial relay. Well, there's some in the LNP saying, MTM first and then fibre on demand, it's more efficient. Well, actually, no, it's not more efficient. We'll go through this in some detail. So let's actually go through the fact that the original full fibre would have been cheaper to build, and I've already gone through some of the evidence for that. Let's go through a little bit more detail about what was actually hidden in the strategic review. So as per this 2021 Sydney Morning Herald article, states a 2013 strategic review into the NBN censored the savings estimates, and the LNP fought to keep that secret for almost 8 years, which is true. So obviously I actually had some correspondence with these journalists actually to find out if it was a freedom of information request, which they got this information, which it wasn't, but they wouldn't really tell me much more. But obviously, at least in my opinion, I think someone very high up in the NBN's actually leaked this information, because I think the NBN basically in 2021 was getting sick of the multi-technology mix, and they knew the only way out of it was basically to convince people, especially any new government, that had to be upgraded to fibre. So so even in their own strategic review, there's enough evidence to suggest that the original full fibre NBN would have cost about 54 billion, which is less than the 57 billion of the multi-technology mix. In fact, you could really argue it's more than 57 billion now, because you can probably add the 2.4 billion Labor's having to spend, and the peak funding costs will still go up because there's no profit, no cash flow. So, we're probably looking at 60 billion now, at least. So, yeah, the full fibre NBN would have been cheaper. Simple as that. And if people want to argue otherwise, then they need to provide data and evidence to back up their claim. If they're going to create the strategic review or the cost-benefit analysis, and we'll go through that in a bit more detail shortly, then they're kidding themselves. So, let's look at the fibre to the node CapEx debacle. And this is, again, as I've pointed out before, Bill Murray and Stephen Rue back in 2017, 2018 confirmed they could do fibre to the prem for $3,900, and that's including the Telstra lease cost. It's on the Hansard record, so it can't be disputed. But the NBN itself now stating in its November 2022 SAU that the fibre on demand could actually cost up to $3,000 per premise. So that would bring the staggering cost of LNP, multi-technology mix, fibre to the node CapEx, plus the LNP fibre on demand, because they're the ones who started it, up to $5,330 CapEx per premise. So that's $1,430 more per premise than what the NBN said fibre to the prem would cost, as per 2017-2018. And the other thing too is, like, fibre to the node has lower revenues than fibre to the prem, much lower take-up rate, has disastrous OPEX costs, as the NBN itself has detailed, and higher ongoing capital costs. What about fibre to the curb? Well, it's the same thing. $4,843. So it's $943 more per premise than what the NBN itself has said fibre to the premise would cost back in 2017 and 2018. It's a debacle. Both fibre to the node and fibre to the curb CapEx is a debacle. Absolute debacle. And as I've pointed out, there's no profits, no cash flow, so there's nothing to offset, that CapEx cost. Nothing at all. What about HFC? Well, I think this is a well-known classic quote from the CEO of Launtil, who really does know what he's talking about. He is an ICT expert as well. If you actually listen to some of his YouTube videos that are online, the guy knows what he's talking about. So basically what he's saying, it's basically HFC's a mess, and he calls it a standout mistake, even worse than fibre to the node. And says if you're looking to rent a property that's got HFC, then basically just move on. So it's a glowing endorsement of HFC. I don't think so. The other thing too is Mike Quigley, the brilliant Mike Quigley, in my opinion. He got shafted. He specifically warned Turnbull back in 2013 that the Optus HFC was unusable, and it turned out it was unusable. So just to quote him, Mike Quigley, I did an evaluation together with some of my engineering colleagues of, for example, the Optus HFC network. It took us all of 2 weeks to figure out it was unusable. That was in fact the advice I gave to the incoming minister in 2013, meaning Turnbull, that this Optus HFC network was unusable. I think he was quite amused at my position because he had assurances otherwise. As we know, it turned out it was unusable. So, it took Quigley 2 weeks and a couple of engineers to work out the Optus HFC network was a pile of junk. Yet the LNP persisted with it for another 2 years, and they realised, it is a pile of junk, and then had to replace it with fibre to the curb with a disastrous CapEx cost I've just gone through. So, that's just absolute train wreck. And further on HFC, again, the CEO of Launtel saying, they want to know where the NBN's going with HFC. Now, since then, the NBN has given some idea where, they do want to get rid of HFC, but there's no funding for it at this stage. So the question is, how is it done? Is the government going to provide more funding, or is it going to have to wait till that NBN actually does start generating some profits and positive cash flows? I don't know. So, but anyone there's still people out there think, oh yeah, HFC is fantastic, and well, it's not. Again, it's just another pile of junk. There's a pile of junk with Telstra, and the NBN's patched up a little bit, and it might patch it up a little bit more with. There's even some talk about DOCSIS 4, but we'll see. I seriously suspect the NBN's just going to push out more fibre and maybe do fibre on demand in the HFC footprint. But I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. There's some evidence to suggest it, including the NBN itself, but there's no formal plan and there's no budget at this stage. So again, we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, HFC, it's a dog. It needs to go as well. And the LNP claimed in their strategic review and corporate plans over the years that the MTM would be cash flow positive in financial year 21, 22 and 23. Yeah, well, lost $1.2 billion and 1.4 negative cash flow. So the only way the NBN will come cash flow positive and profitable is simply for more fibre to be pushed out, because it has higher revenues, vastly lower operating costs and lower ongoing capital costs. And as the NBU was stated in its SAU and more recent corporate plans, the operating and maintenance costs of the MTM copper wire, especially fibre to the node, are simply a catastrophic disaster, which adds to the effective true cost of fibre to the node and fibre to the curb in particular versus fibre to the premise. And there's another cost consideration. What's going to be the cost to decommission the fibre to the node network? Well, I've worked out a figure of potentially up to $500 million. That's $500 million. There's roughly 29,000 fibre to the node cabinets and about 3,000 micronodes. So, it's an incredible amount of e-waste, battery waste, cabinet waste, making the node site safe, removing power from the node site because you can't just leave it there. And the back-end system changes. So, as Laurie Patton said back in 2020, we've wasted billions of dollars on a dud technology that has left a third of the country behind in a digitally enabled world. And don't let anyone tell you this is just an upgrade. Most of the fibre to the node technology out in the field will be redundant and have to be junked. And there's a cost to that. So the LNP's multi-technology mix rollout model and policy has already destroyed vast sums of taxpayers' money and NBN value. And as a classic example, it's been valued $19.7 billion and $57 billion has been spent in peak funding. So, basically, the train wreck LNP multi-technology mix rollout model and policy has in reality been much more efficient in destroying the value of the NBN and taxpayers' money, and the figure now approaching $40 billion. So so much for the former LNP appointed NBN chairman's claim the NBN would be worth $50 billion by 2020. No. So, I think there's enough data and evidence now, and I'm pretty convinced of it, is that the original Labor fibre to the Prem NBN was simply the best and least peak funding cost option with the best technical, financial and economic returns and outcomes versus a train wreck. And it is a train wreck of the multi-technology mix, and as I said, there's enough real-world data and evidence to back up that. So, yep. Okay, let's move on to point 5. The disastrous environmental impact of the copper wire MTM rollout model and policy versus the original full fibre NBN. So this is quite telling. This is from November 2022, the environmental impact of fibre to the home, which is fibre to the premise, is 18 times lower than that of copper networks. I mean, that's an astonishing figure. Absolutely astonishing. And quoting the Boston Consulting Group, the ICT sector is responsible up to 4% of all global emissions. I mean, that's twice the levels of the aviation industry. So, the only way you're going to get electricity consumption down and reduce the carbon footprint is with fibre, as it says here. And then quoting Gary Bolton, the president of the Fibre Broadband Association, I think that's in the USA, fibre is the only way to simultaneously deliver high-speed, reliable internet services and support EC, ESG and CSR goals, green energy, less waste and the greater good of society. It's absolutely true. So, there's a climate argument now for full fibre. The NBN itself, and some of its postings, I won't read through this whole thing, but I think the key thing is, which is right down the bottom, fibre to the premise is NBN's fastest, most reliable residential connection on the NBN network, and we expect there will be less maintenance. Well, there will be less maintenance, simple as that, a lot less maintenance. And this was an interesting one I found on Hansard. It's amazing what you can find on Hansard, going up from 2013. It's quoting Dr. Mike Kelly. Now, I don't know exactly where this figure's come from, but I'm quoted anyway. The VDL system they are proposing, that's the LNP, would require something like 4% of the nation's power to pump that power through the copper system and create the 60,000 cabinets that there would have to be on street corners. Well, there's not 60,000 nodes, if fibre to the node cabinets. There's around 30,000. So is that potentially 2% of the nation's power generation capacity being used to power the debacle of just the LNP's fibre to the node footprint? Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but is it? Could be. Like, is it any wonder the NBN has been forced to build a power station to power the MTM NBN? So, yeah, interesting. Anyway, point 6, and I've gone through some of this in the NBN's SAU document from November 2022. I'm not going to go through the whole lot of this. You can read that at your own leisure, but as I've pointed out, fibre to the node is 22 times more costly than fibre to the premise in terms of operating costs. It goes through some of the truck roll numbers there. So, shocking. And again, it points out HFC again. In addition, the increasing frequency, intensity, extreme weather events is disproportionately impacting NBN's HFC and copper-based networks. And fibre to the premise is proving more resilient. Who would have thought that? They even in the SAU highlighted the fibre to the node 22 times more cost than SDP. And fire engine red, it's like beep, 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 beep. Yep. So, and, again, the NBN's pointing out they'll need to operate fibre to the node and fibre to the premise in parallel for some time, which, it doesn't matter how many people they actually go to fibre to the node, until they switch the damn thing off, many of the associated costs will remain. So, this is stupid. I mean, the fibre to the node network absolutely needs to be upgraded and overbuilt as a matter of absolute urgency and priority. It needs to go. It's sheer technical and financial madness not to. It has to go as quickly as possible. So again, more from NBN's SAU document. Continued reliance on legacy copper networks will diminish NBN's ability to scale up network capacity over time unless significant investments are made to remediate degrading copper assets. So in other words, the MTM's now handbrake on the NBN's ability to upgrade network capacity. And that's another truly shocking consequence. So, the fibre to the node has to go. And it starts talking about electromagnetic interference, which, classic example of that is fibre to the curb. And this actually happened in the area where I live, although down the mountain. because the lower part of the Blue Mountains is fibre to the curb. You know, they've replaced 100,000 network connection devices. That's like the box that goes inside the house because they've been blown up by lightning. 100,000, and that's just not even in 12 months. So yeah, so fibre to the curb has to go as well, as quickly as possible. And yep, no wonder the NBN is sacking 10% of its staff, because the OPEX costs are out of control. So, okay, I thought it'd be useful to quote this article. Well, this is from a US-based website, which I read just about every day. Actually, it has a lot of interesting stuff on it. But, you know, basically it's saying that, you know, the MTM is one of the prime reasons why the company, or the NBN's financial outlook is so dire. You know, this article really sums it up quite well. You know, the NBN is admitting what everyone else knows, that copper is an expensive pain in the neck when affordable and high capacity fibre is readily available. So, you know, the MTM's it's not just a technical train wreck, it's an absolute financial train wreck. You know, and again, quoting Paul Buddy, I love quoting Paul Buddy. He says, the previous government had totally botched up the project. Yeah, well, I don't disagree with that. And another, I think again this is not a Paul Buddy article, which the NBN argues that can't improve service quality standards while it still has customers on copper-based networks, because higher standards will be too expensive to meet, which damage revenues. Yeah, that's why we need full fibre. Okay, point 7, quoting this one because good old Malcolm Turnbull was saying, oh, we should be doing what Germany and the UK are doing. We should be rolling out lots of fibre to the node. Well, how's that worked out for Germany and the UK? So this is quoting an article from December 2022 saying, Deutsche Telekom raises fibre targets, hires more installers. The fact of the matter is, though, DT's, Deutsche Telekom's fibre rollout needs to be aggressive because it spent too long championing copper-based broadband, just like the LNP did and Malcolm Turnbull did. DT instead spent years concentrating on upgrading its fibre to the cabinet, which is fibre to the node, network with vectored VDSL. So in the European Fibre League table, Germany ranks third from the bottom, and the UK ranks just one spot above Germany. Yeah. So what's happening in Germany these days? Well, basically they're rolling out fibre as fast as they can because they realise that, oops, we made a mistake. We shouldn't have done fibre to the node. And this quote, I think, is a classic. It's from Peter Cochrane. He used to be a CTO with BT. He stated back in 2012 that fibre to the node style broadband is one of the biggest mistakes humanity has made, imposing huge bandwidth and unreliability problems on those who implement it. So there you go. So Malcolm Turnbull and the LNP rolled out the biggest mistake humanity has ever made. There you go. It's official. Okay, and you know, let's look at some other countries that rolled out fibre to the premise instead. Look at Spain. It's now 83% of broadband lines are in the country on fibre to the premise, or fibre to the home as they call it. And guess where they are on the Ookla rankings? Oh, 9th. UK and Germany are way behind Spain. The other interesting thing too is across the world there's only about 6.8% who are on short distance VDSL, in other words fibre to the node or potentially fibre to the curb, but there really isn't a lot of fibre to the curb anywhere else in the world. And in contrast, Australia has about, I think it's at least 50%, it could be 60% between fibre to the node, fibre to the curb and fibre to the basement. So, you know, we've rolled out junk technology that no one else in the world actually really uses at any significant level. Okay, point 8, the NBN has now emphatically rejected the BCAR forecast modelling championed by the LNP and Paul Fletcher. So you might be saying, what's BCAR? Well, that's I'm trying to remember now, Bureau of Communications and Arts Research or something like that. You know, something championed by Paul Fletcher a couple of years ago, saying, oh, BK have done the numbers and, you know, we only need 58 megabits or something until 2028, I think. You know, hopefully I'm quoting him correct. But basically, the NBN's going, no. So the NBN does not agree with the BCAR's analysis. And a classic one is data and observations call into question the veracity of the BCAR modelling. So basically saying it's a pile of junk. And the BCAR's projection is also inconsistent with global broadband usage trends. And the NBN doesn't even agree with the way the BCAR actually did its volume forecast. So, yeah, so that's significant. I remember when I read that in the SAU document, I thought, yeah, basically the NBN is saying BCAR's modelling is a pile of rubbish, which it is. Okay. Yeah, the failed forecast and the strategic view and cost-benefit analysis. And why is the Department of Communications still refusing to publicly release unredacted copies of the strategic view? Well, might have something to do with the fact that modelling and forecasts were again a pile of rubbish. So, yeah, they said fibre to the node was going to cost $600 to $650 per premise. So, how well did that work out? Not very well. Then the cost-benefit analysis said, oh, the productivity improvements of rolling out fibre to the node were pessimistic. In other words, the cost-benefit analysis thought, fibre to the node would actually be cheaper. And fibre to the premise would be more expensive or go up in price. Well, not really. In New Zealand, cost of FTTP fell by about 40%. And then I think this article from the Australian Financial Review is a classic. It says from December 2022, despite claims to the contrary by the coalition that Labor's FTTP network would have blown out and cost significantly, international experience shows the cost to deploy it has come down markedly. The MTM, on the other hand, was a disaster, although the coalition insists it rescued a failing project and built a network that saved Australia's bacon during the enforced working from home era of the COVID-19 pandemic. In reality, it pursued a decade of throwing good money after bad. And even in the NBN's own documentation, again, from the strategic review, FTTP has gone from a claimed $4,800, and that's including the Telstra lease cost, to what Bill Morrow and Stephen Roos said, as I've pointed out already, in 2017 and 18, they could have do fibre to the prem for $3,900. And why is the Department of Communications still refusing the public release unredacted copies of the strategic view and cost-benefit analysis, including all the modelling by and both, because that's all what I actually want to see. I mean, all the forecasts were wrong. And I've actually I've had correspondence with the Department of Communications, and they still just refuse to release it. They're saying, oh no, all the information's commercially sensitive. Well, it's a pile of garbage. So how can garbage, so-called data and evidence, that's completely wrong and 9 years old and completely out of date, be commercially sensitive? I don't think so. There's a whole bunch of things here that are the Senate Estimates Witness Guide from 2015, which I won't go through in any detail, but basically saying there's no justification to say something's commercial in confidence. Of course, that's what everyone does when they go appear in those Senate estimates, including the NBN, but then I've quoted a Twitter from David Shoebridge, which I think kind of sums everything up as well. So, yeah. So, basically the CapEx estimates in the LNP strategic review, in my opinion, were completely flawed and failed. And the question has to be asked, where did they come from? And, they were 200 to 300% out. Fibre to the node and HSC were underestimated, and fibre to the prem was overestimated. Now, without saying too much, my understanding is that the figures for the scenario 1 and strategic review, if I get the words out, were actually based on the initial high-cost trial FTTP FTTP rollouts in Tasmania, and then that was extrapolated as to the cost rolling out across Australia, which is just, if that's the case, that's quite shocking. Scenario 2, I don't really know where these figures came from. The only thing I can think of is Turnbull used to claim that fibre to the node would save 3/4 of the cost of the fibre to the prem in terms of capex cost. So, has he or the NBN or whoever has just found some fibre to the prem capex cost from somewhere and then, multiplied it by 25%. I don't know. That's why I want to see the strategic review and all the modelling behind it. Right, and talking about the strategic review, and this is a classic, comments made by one of the champions and architects of the LNP copper wire multi-technology mixed model policy, and who oversaw and led the LNP NBN strategic review. And of course we're talking about JB Rousselot, who's Turnbull's yachting mate, or used to be. So this is a podcast interview in New Zealand from last year, which I think is quite a classic. He says, the biggest thing for me is to make sure the technology that is rolled out is actually rolled out once and provide a long-term future without having to top up and come back and reinvest every single time. And that's the beauty of fibre. You lay the fibre in the ground, and then by changing the electronics at both ends, you can continue to support that growth in demand. Well, geez, that's a bit of a difference from 2013, isn't it? Then anyway, the interview in that podcast asked him about his pivotal role in Australia, meaning like the strategic review and his decision. Well, it wasn't just his decision, but his involvement in the strategic review and the decision to use an MTM. So what does I expect he was going to go rattle off, strategic review, scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 6, blah, 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 and the rest of it, 30 billion cheaper and 3 to 4 years quicker, etc., etc., etc. What does he say? The decision was a political decision. I mean, I've listened to this half a dozen times, and it's kind of like, is that what he's really saying? I mean, I'll be a bit careful. I don't want to verbal him or anything like that, but that's what he said. But political, historical reasons. The whole decision to use an MTM was supposed to be based on the strategic review. As per the Parliament comment here, the strategic review underpinned shareholder ministers' decision to direct NBN Co to implement the MTM in April 2014. So again, I don't want to verbal this guy, but is that what he's really saying? That, hey, look, no, it was a political decision. I mean, if that's what he's saying, then that's, again, quite scandalous, quite frankly. But, I'll be a little bit careful and just, I'll just simply quote what he said and leave it at that. Okay, well, I mean, there's still some people saying, Australia's too big for fibre. No, Australia's not too big for fibre. As of 2013, 90% of the population lived in a total cumulative area of just 80,000 square kilometres. Australia is one of the most urbanised countries in the world. The vast bulk of the population lives on the east coast, and like Adelaide and Perth and Hobart and Darwin, and then throw in some of the big regional towns. Well, that's basically it. Now, Australia's empty. So the only consideration there is the transit network and the fixed wireless network and the satellite network. I mean, that's where the size of Australia matters. But in terms of the fixed line network, it's quite frankly, it's completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. So, but there's still some people saying, we're too big for fibre. Well, geez, if we're too big for fibre, then all the fibre rollouts that are happening now should be stopped. Of course, no one's saying that now, are they? Anyway, getting back to New Zealand, and Mr. Rousselot, is now saying, they want to roll out more fibre to cover 95% of the population in New Zealand. Now, I need to be a little bit careful there, because he says of the population, whereas in Australia it's premises, but, I don't know, there's a huge difference in reality, but there could be. And the other thing that Chorus are doing, they're already starting to decommit. I mean, they didn't roll out much fibre to the node before they then converted to fibre to the premise. But, they've already started switching off their old copper network and turning off their nodes and the rest of it. And they've actually issued a stop sell. So, they're getting on with the job of replacing fibre to the node. And this article's just a recent one, now the NBN's being targeted for copper theft. So, that's not too good. I mean, this has been a big problem in the UK, apparently, with BT. There's been a lot of copper theft over there, and I haven't seen too many reports of this happening in Australia until this one. So, there's another reason why fibre to the node and fibre to the curb need to go. Okay, point 11, a $26 billion change for the worse with the LNP's 2014 cost-benefit analysis on the MTM versus the FTTP NBN. And this cracks me up every time I see it. For starters, Malcolm Turnbull and the LNP could not even get the name of their own cost-benefit analysis report correct. It's not the Vertigan report, it's a Vetrigan report. Yes, it's the Vetrigan report. That's been sitting there on Malcolm Turnbull's Prime Minister of Australia official YouTube channel. So that kind of sums up the LNP's MTM NBN right there. A huge ongoing mistake for 8 years. They can't even spell their own cost-benefit analysis report correctly. No one from the LNP has noticed or bothered to take any action to correct it. Yep. So, the LNP CBA was based on the flawed and failed MTM cost estimates in the strategic review. Essentially, they did make some changes to the strategic review numbers, but not a lot. So essentially, it was basically based on the strategic review. And as the strategic review is a pile of garbage, then quite frankly, the CBA is a pile of garbage. The Vetrigan report, I should call it. So, and the other thing that's interesting too, the cost-benefit analysis, it actually looked at scenario 2, which I can't figure out why. Why didn't they use scenario 1? Or did they realise that scenario 1 was just a complete load of rubbish that they thought even they couldn't use it? So, so the cost-benefit analysis is actually based on scenario 2 versus scenario 6 and came up with a claim cost-benefit of the MTM versus the full fibre NBN of 16 billion. But as I said, that was based on the scenario 2 of 64 billion for full fibre versus the MTM of 41 billion on scenario 6. So, I already know the MTN is blown out by at least $16 billion, i.e. from 41 billion to 57 billion peak funding. So that already wipes out the claim $16 billion benefit of the MTM, and based on the leaked data from the LNP strategic review, the FTTP NBN would have been 54 billion in peak funding had it continued, as per the leaks to the Sydney Morning Herald in 2021. So, if we actually update the cost-benefit analysis, and this is using the LNP's own numbers and their strategic review and their CBA, with the only adjustment being on interest rates, and those interest rates apply to not only the FTTP NBN, but also the multi-technology mix. So it's kind of irrelevant anyway. So, it's a 10 billion actual cost benefit with the original full fibre NBN versus a train wreck multi-technology mix. Had the original full fibre NBN continued from 2013. It's a $26 billion change for the worse as well. So the LNP's own strategic review and cost-benefit analysis, the Vetrigan report, now indicates that Labor's original full fibre NBN was not only the most financially favourable to build, meaning lower peak funding, but also had the best cost-benefit analysis. And it sure has to be noted, the cost-benefit analysis assumed that Australians would not demand high-speed broadband offered by full fibre, so it didn't cost in any funding at all, any capex at all, for any future upgrades to 2040. I mean, how ridiculous was that? And then it didn't envisage any upgrade at all required before 2025, then only in the case of unexpectedly high growth in demand. Well, guess what? Even the Liberals themselves realised in 2020 that, the MTM couldn't deliver. We better start upgrading it to fibre. Seriously. Okay, point 12, the disastrous slide in Australia's Ookla fixed line broadband ranking, and it just keeps getting worse. I mean, we're now down to 87th as of August 2023. We were actually 30th back in 2013 when the original full fibre was being rolled out, and 42 countries have faster median download mobile speeds than Australia's median fixed line download speeds. So, the multi-technology mix, the Liberals' multi-technology mix, basically has left Australia as a digital backwater. I mean, that's just shocking. 87th. We're stuck in this round, mid-50s. It's just a train wreck. And the NBN, in that SAU document, which is why I keep saying go have a read of it, it says back in May 2022, the top 25 countries, which is now 37 countries, have median download speeds of above 100 megabits per second. And 10 of our top 10 two-way trading partners have faster fixed line broadband speeds, and emphasise two-way trading. So, I mean, that's a national scandal. It truly is, and it's simply a consequence of the MTM and its train wreck technical, financial and economic outcomes, because the technology, the copper technology, fibre to the node in particular, is speed restricted. Fibre to the curb is, or it can do 100 megabits per second, but can't do faster than that. So it's a consequence of the MTM technology, and it's also a consequence of the financials. Lower revenues, higher operating costs and higher ongoing capital costs. So that means, plan prices are higher because of it. And there's, I've gone through the economic outcomes as well. So, it's a debacle. The MTM is a debacle. And this was quoting a report, the Australian Telecoms Industry Report, 2023 to 2030, which says Australia is now in the unfortunate position being the only country in the developed world with a higher average mobile speed compared to fixed broadband as per the Ookla speed test. And the other thing that what the MTM's done is opened it up to competition from the likes of 5G, even 4G, and Starlink as well. So what does the NBN now say in relation to global competitiveness and the importance of reliable, very high-speed broadband? Well, again, mega backflip by the NBN. Good old Labor government gets the NBN back on path to, away from this copper garbage. So, fibre is inherently more capable of delivering faster uploaded download speeds. No kidding. More reliable than copper connections and reduces our maintenance and operating costs. I mean, we've just got to get rid of the copper and the HFC cable and go fibre. It's as simple as that. Point 13. The LNP FTTP NBN envelope beer coaster napkin myth. Now, this just absurd, the utter garbage that's come out of people's mouths from the LNP over the years. That Labor, Conroy and Kevin Rudd designed the full fibre NBN on the back of an envelope or beer coaster or whatever. I mean, it's a myth. It never happened. It's been refuted by Conroy, it's been refuted by Rudd, yet the LNP over the years has persisted with it. So, it's just a pack of BS, quite frankly. It's quite disgusting. Yeah, people in the media, even Turnbull in his own book he wrote about himself, his memoir, but he spent 10 pages writing about the NBN, and I think it was in the first or second paragraph he repeated this myth. So, it's a myth. Never happened. And I love this one. This is a classic. Point 14. It's a Twitter post made by Turnbull's and the LNP's UK-based expert broadband consultant who had a key role and influence in the LNP's strategic review, in particular the Vettigran report, who stated that 15 megabits per second download and 2.5 ARC was sufficient for the median household to 2023. He's now arguing against 1 gigabit broadband for home use. So in that Twitter post, In late 2021, he states how massively overspecified gigabyte broadband is for home use. Yeah, I won't say too much because, again, just don't want to risk being sued, so to speak. But anyway, meanwhile in the UK, what's actually happening in his own home country? Rob Kenny's home country. Well, BT is basically rolling out gigabit plus speed capable residential full fibre like fury, to quote Openreach's chief executive back in March 2021, because the UK, like Germany, and now also Australia, is playing catch up on full fibre, isn't it? And it should also be noted the UK's Virgin O2, announced in July 2021, and it's also rolling out gigabit plus speed full fibre network for residential use, covering its entire HEC network footprint, which will ultimately go as well. So, again, New Zealand, Europe, quoting the NBN itself. We need to do more work to keep pace with other countries. Then he's quoting the European Union is consulting on gigabit infrastructure with the goal of making gigabit capability available to all EU citizens and businesses by 2030. So, Turnbull's expert broadband consultants raging against gigabit speed for residential use, but the rest of the world's going that way. Point 15. The MTM rollout model and policy and use of junk copper wire and junk HFC cable has, according to the Productivity Commission, I do like this one too, created so many extra costs that there are poor prospects for the company to ever pay its debts. So basically the Productivity Commission is saying, well, the MTM is directly responsible for creating so many extra costs and poor prospects for the company to ever pay its debt. And I love it uses the words costs associated with the degraded copper wire and hybrid fibre coax networks that the NBN Co was directed to use for its multi-technology mix rollout. And then it says, emphatically, had these factors not been in play, it is possible that at its commencement, NBN Co might have reasonably forecast rate to return closer to that of a commercially focused business, meaning like the MTM's basically screwed the finances of the NBN. And if it had been full fibre, it would have generated a much better return that's commercially focused. I mean, that's pretty emphatic. Point 16, Telstra's response to the proposed NBN SAU. This is again going back to late last year, I think. So, but what does Telstra say? Well, customers should not have to pay for cost inefficiency, and NBN Co's historic inefficiency has been significant, meaning basically the MTM. So customers shouldn't have to pay for the screwed up finances of the NBN. And then it states HFC and FTTN customers experience the lowest service satisfaction. Well, geez, no kidding. And then it says the FTTP upgrade has the potential to solve many problems experienced by consumers. Well, of course it does. And then Telstra saying just how far behind Australia is compared with other advanced countries. Well, we know that. I think the UCLA results, 87, so speak for themselves. What about Optus? What has Optus got to say? It's not acceptable that a household can buy 100 megabits per second but must achieve less than 12 megabits per second before the NBN considers to be underperformance. It's all the consequence of the MTM. Copper garbage. And consumers are paying the price for it. And more from Optus that says the SAU has no meaningful improvements in service levels. Well, because the NBN's stuck on copper, isn't it? There's not much it can really do until it gets rid of it. It goes to fibre. Yep. And the other thing Optus says, which is interesting, that, Optus has concerns that NBN Co is too readily seeks to address copper remediation issues via Fibre Connect program, incurring additional costs to the consumer. So, what it's doing in some cases is forcing customers to go, well, we'll put your fibre in, but you're going to have to pay a higher price for it because they can't fix up the copper. The copper has to go. Okay, point 17, Starlink. Where is it in reality taking customers from the NBN? Well, the NBN has advised Senate estimates that it's lost somewhere in the order of 10,000 to 17,000 Skymuster customers to Starlink. Yet Starlink states they have 120,000 customers in Australia. So where else is the NBN bleeding customers from? Fibre to the node? Fixed wireless? And, of course, there'd be homes and businesses that never took up the NBN in the first place, so that could account for some of it. There's also all the grey nomads and other holiday makers travelling around the country that, you go on social media and every second video on Starlink in Australia is someone going around the country in a caravans using it. So, but anyway, as I said, I've seen enough evidence on social media and elsewhere to suggest perhaps the NBN losses of Starlink are not just coming from Skymuster, but also fibre to node and the fixed wireless footprints, and those never took up the NBN in the first place. And it should be pointed out, the NBN under the Liberals was going to upgrade fixed wireless back in 2017, 2018, except it never happened. They did all these press announcements saying, oh yeah, we're going to upgrade it to 100 megabits per second. And they actually did some demonstrations that they could actually do it. In fact, they do faster than... And this is not on 5G. This is on 4G. So, they had the technical ability to be able to do it. And then, in 2018, they killed it off. Well, the question is, why did they kill it off? I remember Bill Murray saying in Senate estimates it was going to cost them billions and billions to do it. It's like, well, then why did you make all these press announcements a year earlier, what you didn't cost it properly? I don't think that's the reason why they killed it. I think the reason why they killed it, because the timing seems to indicate this could be the reason why, is because they had to pay for the debacle of the HFC patch-up. The so-called pause for customer experience. What a classic quote that is. So, they lost $1 billion on HFC between lost revenue and additional capex and patching up the HFC because it's such a dog. This is the old Telstra HFC. It should have been like the Optus HFC. It should have been just as bad as that. And then at least they would have rolled out fibre to the curb or something, got the fibre in the street at least. So, and the other thing too is like the first Starlink satellites were launched in 2019, May 2019. So basically the Liberals did nothing for 3 years. Because we're not going to do anything to fix wireless until March 2022. It was kind of a bit too late. So yet again, the Labor government's having to actually do the fixed wireless upgrades and get it done, and make the changes to Skymuster, which if now Skymuster can get up to 100 megabits per second, which for the technology is like not too bad. So, Minister for Communications Michelle Rowland was literally handed an absolute MTM NBN basket case in May 2022 due to the LNP's theological-like obsession with copper wire. For over a decade, copper-based fixed-line technologies, including HFC, that belonged in a museum 15 years ago, and the lack of timely action on fixed wireless upgrades. Malcolm Turnbull, again, I'm not going to say too much, but there's a few quotes I'd like to quote, including the one about, I wonder if he's got gigabit speed now on his HFC. But also a quote from Hansard, and this is not a mistake, it's from 1910, so it's 113 years ago, which states, "No doubt every member of the committee will sympathise with the honourable member for Wentworth in his endeavour to secure better telephone communication for constituents who receive 3 mails a day, but I should like to speak for 3 minutes on behalf of residents of the Commonwealth who receive only a mail a fortnight." So yes, I'll leave others like Renee LeMay, who said Malcolm Turnbull was Australia's worst ever communications minister, and Paul Buddy again, who said Malcolm Turnbull had no clue what he was doing. So, I think I kind of agree with that. So, let's make it absolutely clear. The LNP did not inherit an NBN train wreck or failed project in September 2013. The LNP instead have created a calamitous train wreck and disastrous failed project with their copper MTM, a technical, financial and economic train wreck for NBN consumers, the NBN itself, taxpayers and the Australian economy, And now the ALP government and Michelle Rowland has to start cleaning up this copper wire and copper cable mess at vast additional expense to the taxpayers of Australia and NBN consumers. And it is indeed a massive repair job, and unfortunately the financial consequences for the NBN are never going to be fully repaired, and the same for the economic consequences for Australia. So it does seem appropriate, applicable and prophetic. The following words are now used in relation to the LNP's MTM NBN, which is, Turnbull likes to tell the joke about the man asking for directions in an Irish pub, only to be told if he wanted to reach his destination, he should not have started from here. Well, the LNP's multi-technology mix NBN arrived at that Irish pub in May 2022 after going around in circles, lost in an Irish bog for 8 years. So let's sum it up. The LNP multi-technology mix rollout method and policy since the 7th of September 2013 is a colossal, utter destruction and torching of taxpayers' money and NBN value, is a technical, financial and economic failure for this country, has cost double what they promised to Australian people back in 2013. It took twice as long. They said it was going to be finished in 2016 and it wasn't. It generates far less revenue than a full fibre NBN. It's bleeding customers to 5G and Starlink, and that's a direct consequence of the MTM rollout model and policy. Has copper wire and copper cable related operating and maintenance costs that are rapidly spiralling out of control, as confirmed by the NBN itself. It's highly unreliable, as confirmed by the NBN itself. Is no longer commercially viable, as confirmed by the Productivity Commission. Has left Australia less globally competitive, is costing the Australian economy up to $53 billion a year in lost GDP, and it will destroy up to $500 billion of GDP from the inception of the MTM back in 2014, or late 2013, 2014 to mid next decade. And it's potentially using a significant quantity of the nation's electricity capacity to power just the debacle of the fibre to the node footprint. And it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars to decommission the junk fibre to the node network. And the person who oversaw and led the LNP's NBN strategic review, instead of defending it, now uses words like political and political battlefield when asked about his pivotal role in a decision to use an MTM, and makes no reference to that strategic review. And then one of the LNP's expert broadband consultants says that gigabit broadband speed is massively overspecified for home use. I mean, that's just an astonishing comment, considering what's happening everywhere else in the world, including his own country that he lives in. And all the real-world data and evidence, and almost all of that's from the NBN itself, that's already publicly available or has been leaked, overwhelmingly supports the conclusion that the original full fibre NBN model and policy was the right one for Australia at a cheaper peak funding cost and completed by end of calendar year 2021, with higher revenues, vastly lower operating costs and vastly lower ongoing capital costs, and very significant economic benefits for the country. So, the MTN must now be overbuilt and upgraded, and as the NBN CS stated, the copper network will be replaced by fibre, and it's good to see that massive repair job has been started and helped along by the ALP government. But the Parliament also needs to make that happen, and it needs to happen quickly. And it needs to be funded accordingly, including additional government funding for the sake of the country, economic growth, NBN consumers, business and industry. And it should be noted, Mark Gregory said back in June 2023 that, the NBN's struggling to move forward, which it is. I mean, the SAU process has been a debacle. They've had already 3 goes at it, and it still hasn't been approved by the ACCC. And the high-speed plans, especially the high-speed upload plans, are simply too expensive. And, people are not going to use them if they cost too much. So, again, moving to an all-fibre fixed access network as quickly as possible is central to resolving NBNCo's underlying problems, which is true. So, we need to get rid of the copper. need to get rid of the HSC. And the government should consider how to ensure that this cost does not become an anchor tied around NBN Co's neck. And the government, this is the important bit from Mark Gregory, the government should consider an expert panel that reviews NBN Co and the current state of the NBN. Okay, so that's the end of the video presentation. I'm just going to put on the record that I haven't used the NBN for almost 3 years now, as my fibre to the node was a complete joke and hopelessly unreliable. I have posted other videos on this. So I actually use 5G home broadband, and I get download speeds in the range of 500 to 700 megabits per second and upload between 30 and 65 in all weather, including snow. And just to be clear, I've no connection or association now in the past with the NBN, any of its contractors, any telecommunications company or any of its contractors, any service provider or any of its contractors. No connection whatsoever in the past, recent, whatever, any political party. I'm not a member of any political party, no links to it, no association whatsoever, nor any media organisation, nor am I privy to any confidential information from the NBN or government or any other source. And as I've kindly hinted before, I have actually worked in ICT, both at a technical level and then a management level. So I've certainly got some skin in the game and maybe some idea of what I'm talking about. So, okay, that's the end of the video, so thanks for watching.